I don't think we have that data yet. We're gonna collect all that data and do it next month with all the remaining football games.
I would say, judging by the stands, if it
Not a
was,
whole lot.
if it was just the people that came and went into the game, it was probably like 150,
All Norman residents, maybe.
maybe. There, I
That many
saw several
people wanted to
shirts
drive that
though.
far.
I talked to a couple, they were pretty nice. They were joking about, yeah, we brought the weather with us. I'm like, yeah.
Thanks.
I don't have the data for this report anyways. We probably could look it up if you really want to know.
I'm just curious how they travel.
Here's your change.
Name and phone number on the back of the ticket.
Which one were you asking for? Which game?
May.
May. Yes, it's too soon for us to have the data back yet, so we can pull it.
Yeah, we were gonna wrap up do a full look at football season next month, because we'll be done with the games by that point.
It'll be good to have this data going into Alabama too, even though we.
I know, but
Oh, I'm looking at uncertainty having that
mine
low.
too, I'm in the same.
If anyone doesn't mind, just go ahead and write Shakira on the back of your tickets. Increase my chances.
All two is bad weather.
5.
And they moved
Willing
it
to
up,
go.
so it's
Off schedule, bad weather.
that team.
No, they
Was
weren't
the,
bad.
Probably should change that background picture, Daniel.
It's okay.
Is that a game we were winning?
That was a Big 12 game.
Yeah, we just start with
so yeah.
That was stolen from the internet somewhere.
Figured we'll do.
Okay.
So it
we
is
were
4
winning
o'clock,
those.
and I'm gonna go ahead and get the community,
Kansas State.
Business and Community Affairs Committee meeting going for Thursday, November 7th, 2024. I'm filling in for Councilmember Peacock, who couldn't be here today. And so we've got 2 items on the agenda, and we'll go ahead and get started with the first one, which is a report on special events attendance and visitors. It looks like we have Parks and Rec Director and Dan Shim from Visit Norman here.
Yeah, so we sent out reports earlier today, and I think they're in your packet. I didn't necessarily put everything into the slideshow, but we are going to wrap up all the football games in December when we meet for that final meeting. By the time we get there, or for the December, I call it the final meeting because it is the final meeting of the year, not the fiscal year, but the calendar year. So I'm rambling, sorry. But one of the things we don't have in the PowerPoint is that we do have numbers from Fall Fest, and when we ran the numbers, we did kind of do a comparative to make sure that when we look at times, we did it basically an all-day time and after 5 p.m. time. That usually tells a lot to the story, but for the whole day on Main Street, there was about 14,000 people that went through there all day. After 5 p.m., it was about 10,000 people. And then when you talk about dwelling time around Main Street, during the day it was 96 minutes, and then after 5 p.m. it was 103 minutes. We had about 58% of those people were from Norman, so we had quite a bit of people from. This is just Fall Fest, which was on the 26th.
When did it start? And when did it officially
Fall
end?
Fest, I think, started at right.
6 to 9 officially, but I think people got there a bit earlier.
And then our historical numbers on that to kind of compare to that. So we're probably looking at the number you want to focus on is that 10,100 number when you talk about how many people were in that area after 5 p.m. Historical numbers would be 11,600 in 2022, and then in 2023 we had 14,000. But those were the all-day numbers, and we had it goes a little bit less. So it looked like we peaked a little bit this year compared to other years. 2022 after 5 o'clock, which is what we're kind of judging this from, was 7,500 people in 2022 and 9,900 in 2023.
So this year they had more people overall?
We had about, looks like we had about 200 more people according to the data that we got through Placer.
And they were staying an hour and a half on average. Or more.
Yeah. Yes, about 103 minutes. So, and then your typical stay time is about an hour and a half. So that's probably people going through there eating lunch and walking to their cars or walking back from to the office. Kind of hopping into the stuff I do have graphics for. These are Norman Forward sites. School started this past month, and so once again, all this data most of the data you're gonna hear today is from September. We kind of pace about a month behind. That's just so that we can get some early data, but it does evolve as they started getting everything in from these different apps, how they judge where people are or tell where people are at. You can see that Griffin Park started the spike that correlates with soccer starting their fall season over there. Also, Reese Park starting baseball. Then you got Westwood, of course, taking a dive. Thank you, Josh. I mean, the council members, cool. That was my one joke for the day. It took a dive there towards the end because everybody went back to school. Also, your YFAC numbers. Usually, when you talk about basketball, volleyball, that month that you go, September and October, your slowest months, will start picking up once the fall sports or traditional fall sports starting to wind up. And even at this month, so far at YFAC, we have been working with the schools. We've done high school basketball scrimmages that have towns from all over that are coming through there to scrimmage, and we just did the middle school all-city scrimmages, which was the first time they were able to do all the scrimmages at the same place and same time. We had both 7th and 8th grade there, all JV, varsity, your A and B teams for both grades, along with even the developmental leagues all playing at the same time. That was on Tuesday night. It was packed if you drove by on Tuesday.
So, Westwood Family Aquatic Center, that just is the pool, not the whole park?
Yes, when we draw that circle around there, we're kind of focusing in once again on these norm forward sites.
Okay.
We can get information from the golf course, but we've kind of looked at it in our rounds that we're able to count. It's pretty close to that, so we just don't usually get too much into that.
But you are able to see like overall visitors per year to Westwood Park, and then Griffin, does this mean Griffin and Reeves are our two busiest parks? And I would assume because of the athletics
Yeah,
stuff, that would probably be the case.
yeah, it's because of the fall. And soccer, NYSA is our biggest youth league that we have. Fall is, if I remember correctly, there's running somewhere around 2,000 small athletes that play during that time. The second biggest one is probably basketball. We have about 1,400, 1,700, depending on the time when that actually happens.
Are you able to see, like, any park in Norman? Would you have data on how many visitors per year each park has?
You can break it
Something
down
like
to per park. Sometimes if you talk about the smaller neighborhood parks, like if you go to Brookhaven Village Park, which is this kind of an odd park that is connected to some of the neighborhoods, it has a lot of green space. It doesn't have a whole lot of people go there, so you might not get accurate information because usually it picks up on, when you have a lot of cell phones that are in that area in a specific part of time, that's when it starts collecting the data. So if you don't have a whole lot of cell phones running through that area, you're not going to collect too much.
So we would be able to maybe see like Andrews Park, even though there's no sports leagues that play there. I do know they practice there, and then the skate park is real busy.
Correct.
And Jazz and June, of course.
And we have a few occasions when you go back to our major festivals that are in Andrews Park that we have been collecting data there as well.
Awesome, okay. Thank you.
This one is Reeves Park, so I'll make sure that I look at the right information. There was a lot of tournaments there. And there we had August 31st, September 1st, we had what they call the Rocklahoma baseball tournament, and this kind of looks like they had about 6 big tournaments through there, and you see those numbers going up. This is the same thing with once you get out of the hot Oklahoma weather and you start getting back to your leagues that you can play outside, you'll see these numbers spiking at your parks. But those have a lot to do with tournaments that they've been having out at Reese Park. I didn't put Griffin in there.
The Beertoberfest was at Reeves Park on end of September. For some reason, it wasn't in October, I don't think.
You talking about our beer fest?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we have numbers from that as well. We had about 1,800 people that showed up to the Brewtoberfest. thought you were talking about a baseball tournament. I was like, man, that would have been good.
Yeah, you do have it, yeah.
Had to let it
September
calculate,
20th.
let it marinate in my head there for a second. Going on to YFAC, once again, you know, we're seeing a little bit lower numbers right now, just because it is the slow time, but we are starting to pick back up. We only had 4 tournaments in there. 2 of them were swim meets. We had a camp in a middle school volleyball tournaments, and then we also started our TYA Academy, which is a Trae Young Academy, which is basically a mid-level. It's between what I would call our traditional like junior jammer, YFAC, Optimist leagues. It's a step above that until you get to these what we would call the high school or AAU type tournaments that they have on the weekends, somewhere in the middle.
What is that far right graph? What does that mean?
The one that has 275,000.
Yeah, and then 2022 and 2020, well,
Uh,
3 of those years, that like
That's
people.
total
working
for-
Yeah, that's the total for the whole year. So when you start looking at the 2023 numbers and the 2002 numbers, those are probably just picking up construction.
Okay, so
Workers are on site.
Okay. But 275,000 visitors, that's how many so far this year?
Yes. And we didn't fully open until mid-February.
So you have a projected year-end estimate of how many visitors might have visited the first year?
Yeah, and we can get that. We can close out in January. Maybe if we probably be better numbers in February, we can close out these areas and give you how many total people rolled through these centers, their average dwell time, how much time they spend in there basically, which is extremely high for, typically when you go look at a target, you're talking about 30 to 45 minutes is your average dwell time, and at YFAC it's above 2 hours.
And does this, does this align with kind of what we thought number of visitors we would have?
I don't know what we thought, but I think when we look at these numbers, the first time we started getting these numbers in, we actually exceeded what we were thinking. Now that we've been here going through this for 8 or 9 months, and you look at a month like September, you're trying to figure out why did we have such a slow month, and like I said, we're kind of typically pointing that back into the start of school. You got outdoor fall sports that start, so it's usually a tougher time for probably your indoor
Home
sports.
games every weekend,
Exactly.
4 straight weeks, yeah, okay.
We did have some questions about some shopping districts, and we wanted to, or were actually on football games where people were, if they were in specific towns. So we're gonna go over that here in a second, but this is just kind of our shopping districts is pretty much stated every single month that UMP is your highest visited area. Right after that is Campus Corner. These are kind of our stats when you start comparing other big districts, which I believe y'all asked for in the last meeting. So we're looking at that. Red line is the OKC Plaza District, Midtown, Oklahoma City, and the Bricktown neighborhood. You can see that Campus Corner, especially when you start getting into game day weekends, are exceeding all those other areas in Oklahoma City.
So Bricktown's the only one that is, I would say on average, more active than Campus Corner in the metro area.
Correct.
And the previous graph, so University North Park at the top, and then Campus Corner and downtown, kind of Campus Corner and downtown going back and forth between 2 and 3, it looks like.
Yeah, correct. And it kind of appears that Campus Corner, your slowest times are during the hotter summer months, June, July area.
And there's a little bit of a spike for downtown in April with Norm Music Festival, but another one in August. What might that be? Do we have any idea?
I would guess
I know
that's
Art Walks will be-
students back to school. You've got a lot of parents and freshmen coming in, students coming back. So we see anytime there's a parents' weekend or parents in town, downtown is a major draw for them.
You look at the right-hand numbers, that kind of breaks down how many visitors they had in each year. and also calculating the last 12 months in each one of those districts. Now, this question came from Councilmember Hinkle, just wanting to know on game days, what were the surrounding cities around us doing? And pretty much the only city that you saw, that you kind of see regular spikes in is Moore, or those higher spikes. Everything else is pretty much staying consistent. So I would think it's pretty safe to say the only city that we are showing here that gets any overflow effect from game days is Moore.
We did not include Oklahoma City there.
Yeah.
But I guess Noble doesn't have any hotels, and I guess Riverwind has a hotel in Goldsby, but yeah, I could see that. Councilmember Grant?
Could we include OKC if that's where some of this is going? And I do think that there might be promo to come to OKC when you're around Norman.
We can add that next time.
And if the
And I think
bottom-
when we wrap up the football season, we'll try to put as much information in there as we can.
The bottom part is interesting too, the 2021 to now, Norman being at 34.3 and then going up to 41, and Moore being at 28 and declining each of the years since then. I wonder what would contribute to that. It looks like they're all declining except for us over the last 4 years too, so that's interesting.
So yeah, we're right. It looks like we're right at about 42.5 million is our capacity, I would say, right?
Mhm.
So that
Councilor
undercurrent. Sorry.
Nash.
So this is like all, for all the days, right?
Correct. It looks like when Sarah pulled that data, she just went through there from July 1st through October, which is, I guess,
Fiscal year.
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the Newcastle has little spikes. Kind of looks like on those days too, just weird. It's not a very convenient drive to.
And those those spikes that you see. So if you're caught in traffic, I think that the way that Sarah, if I remember right, has it set up, basically if you get caught, if you're in a place for longer than 5 minutes, and they're actually recording data because there's enough cell phone spots in that space that's basically reading as you're in Newcastle or in that zip code. So what you're seeing there could be just as simple as on game days there's traffic or traffic backups, or that could be people coming and leaving work as well.
And Newcastle is quite a bit larger in population than Noble, Purcell, and Goldsby. It's about triple their populations each. Maybe that could be a factor too.
And then,
Could you?
oh, sorry.
No.
And then we'll pass it on to Dan.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna keep this one to just kind of the key insights and key performance indicators that we're looking at, since I know you guys have a second agenda item. So this is just for September here. We see number of devices that are visitors. And so Sarah's Placer data and my Zartico data are a little different, whereas we're kind of using it to look at quality visits and as opposed to any visitor. And so this is to qualify as a visitor, you have to be here for 2 or more hours. So it's not gonna pick up, like Jason said with Sarah's Placer, on anybody driving through, or you stop and eat at some restaurant on I-35 and leave before the 2 hours. So interesting, of all of the devices that were tracked in September, 34.7% were visitors, so 2 or more hours from outside of Norman. And this is probably conservative because Placer or Zartico includes or classifies the visitors 50 miles or more outside of Norman. Once again, that quality visitor that's coming and spending money, so they don't let us tweak that. So if we're looking at just non-Normanites, it's probably pretty conservative. Percent of out-of-state visitors, 62.9%. Percent of all the spend in Norman that came from visitors, 24.3%. And again, because of that classification we just talked about, it's probably conservative there. But what's really cool is that far box on the right, percent of visitor spend towards local businesses, 43% of visitor spend went to our local businesses. And that's a classification through that Zardico has, where they're looking at the non-chains. They kind of filter out the gas stations and other things. So our locally owned unique businesses get a lot of visitor spend, which I know when I travel, I want to go to unique locally owned places too. So here's year to date. You see September was a little higher, 34.7 devices were visitors. This is year to date, so January 1 to September 30th. So a little bit lower, but that includes, summer and other times. 62.5% out of state visitors. Percent of total spend from visitors, 17.9%, and 35% spend towards local businesses. So going back, you see total spend is way up, and percent at local businesses is way up. We've got students in town, we've got festivals, we've got football games and other things. So how are visitors contributing? In September, percent of all restaurant spend that came from visitors was 31%. So lots of restaurant spending from our visitors, and that's one of the key insights here. Percent of all retail spend in September, 23% of that total was from visitors. Percent of all attraction spend, 28% of that was from visitors, and then you see the average spending there, 66 at restaurants, 86 at retail, 77 at attraction. For year to date, once again, these numbers go down. It includes those slower summer times and other things, non-football season related. 19% of the total spend at restaurants from visitors, 21% of that retail spend comes from visitors, and then 13% of the total attraction spend comes from visitors. What's interesting though is for the year, the average visitor spend is up versus the just in September. And so I think that's people, eating quicker, going to, grab a quick bite before the game, do those sorts of things versus some of the other events that are here for year round. Here's our stay values for September. Hotel stay values up 34% versus the previous year. Short-term vacation rental, think Airbnbs, it was up 4% versus the previous year. Length of stay was up 6% at hotels, but down or flat 2.8% or 2.8 days at short-term rentals.
So Dan,
Yeah.
does that mean are you seeing an increase or decline overall in short-term rentals as a preferred option with people?
It's kind of holding steady. It's occupancy rates, and we can go to the next slide here. We'll kind of answer that question a little bit, Councilmember Holman. So looking at hotel occupancy for September, it is up 12% versus the previous year. Average daily rate at hotels is up 12% for September from the previous years. Hotel demand, that's down, but this one, keep in mind, this number is comparing it to the prior year. We're only through September here, so that's only 3/4 of the year. Only down 5% from last year's total, so demand will be up by the time we look at it. So the bottom boxes there is your short-term rental, and that percent change there is less. Occupancy is only up 4% versus the prior year. Average daily rates up 9%. Demand though is up 24%. And I think what we're seeing there, at least the trend nationwide, is we kind of had a bunch of inventory come on the market. Lots of people either built or bought to put inventory on the market for short-term rentals. And so occupancy and rates are kind of flat, but there's still demand to stay in them. Let's see, year to date, kind of these same things. Hotel stay values up 9%, so it's up a little less. Stay values up 11%. And then length of stay at both places is relatively flat. And these are kind of the numbers we just looked at, year to date, up 11% in occupancy, 13% in rates. So that's where we see the big increase in hotel guest tax collection. With that, let's see,
Dennis?
is there another, I sent you two, is there another one on there?
I thought we didn't do it, sorry.
That's okay. I can do it for next time.
I did see the one that says Tennessee Volunteers at OU.
Yeah, so
I
I
saw
wish,
it on there.
is there a way to pull that up here, Jason?
Hold on one second.
What's really cool on this one is the dynamic visualization that I'd like to show. Each visitor is a little white dot. And so over the weekend for Tennessee, you can kind of see the hot spots and their movements visually on the map. And Oklahoma City also happens to be a Zartico partner. And so we got together with them, and although there's a gap in Moore because they're not a partner, so we don't have that data, you could see all the dots in Oklahoma City as well. And when it got close to game time, the I-35 just going south lit up like a Christmas tree. So when we're talking about getting that Oklahoma City data in there,
When you say Moore's not a partner, is that just, they don't have the software that?
they don't have the software. And so when we ask to map that stuff out, Zartico doesn't have that in their collections because Moore isn't one of their partners.
But the people coming from Oklahoma City, sorry.
Yeah.
But the people coming from Oklahoma City, they don't count as visitors because they're within
That-
50 miles.
Right, so for our software and our numbers, they don't, but that dynamic visualization just looks at where they're,
Yeah.
where they're at. So we can't get that up, let me,
I was trying to pull up your email.
yeah. it's okay.
Yeah, because you. Did you get, okay, because we lost the PowerPoint on the.
Yeah, I did that on purpose. I was only looking at your email. Hopefully Tim's not
Let me
watching.
see here, I'm gonna see
It
what I
doesn't
sent
work.
to you, Jason, so that I can
Yep.
pull that up. And then we can go through it real quick if you guys would like, but there's some real interesting insights from the Tennessee game. All right, here we go. Pull this up on mine. Oh, come on.
If you're looking for your presentation, it's on the desktop.
Oh, I didn't add part of his.
Oh.
Okay, so you guys do have this, the key insights slides in yours? Okay, good. So I'm just gonna pull it and point out just a couple things in here. So visitors were responsible for 4.5% of the total spend in Norman. This is just for that Tennessee game weekend. And 56% of that went to local businesses. So that's just tremendous to see here. We know that the chains are gonna get some impact too, but really what makes Norman Norman and all our cool spots are getting business, and we see it from this. So that's cool. And you can see there, how does this performance compare year to date? So there was a massive spike in devices, total spend, and spend at local businesses during this event. And you see, recall from the previous slide, restaurant spend now is at, for that weekend was at 45% of total spend came from visitors. Retail was about par, so 22%. Of course, accommodations, attractions are up there too, so.
It's interesting, I think, that they, next to accommodations, which is what they're spending the most on, but retail being the next at 68, just slightly above attractions.
Yeah.
As far as total amount of money that people are spending is on retail stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Now, the percentage isn't going way up because they're here for other things, but when they do shop, they are spending, so that's good to see.
You don't have to buy the same shirt twice, right? But you are gonna have to eat multiple times.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So 25.6% increase in overall visitor spending activity during the game weekend compared to the same time the previous 4 weeks. And what I'll point out there, so note this is compared to the previous 4 weeks. September, we had the Tennessee game, but you had August, you had still a football game. September, you had several football. So football games are still included in here, but it's not an SEC game. That was our first SEC game. And so when people ask what was the impact of the SEC, you're kind of comparing those first 4 games, which were our 3 games, Temple and Houston and Tulane. I equate that to kind of a Big 12 experience. and this is the SEC. So we really see there is a tremendous impact there.
Yeah, none of those teams I would say have big traveling fan bases. I don't recall even seeing a single Temple fan actually. I don't
Yeah,
think so.
I did see a couple, but not many for sure. So restaurant spend increased 61.4%. Nightlife saw an 18.6% increase in spend. Now, I do want to point out retail saw a decrease, 41.3%, but this is compared to the previous 4 weeks, which includes move-in for the students, and they're coming and all their parents are buying the essentials they need to outfit their apartments and their dorm rooms and other things. So that's what I attribute that big retail decrease to.
Fourth game of the season, they don't need to buy more.
Right, that's
food
right.
stuff.
Now, our opportunities here, and this is one of the reasons why we started up the Crimson Friday concert series, and we anticipate that only getting bigger and better. But nightlife saw an 18.6% increase in spend. We would love to see that significantly higher, and so we're going to continue to market our nightlife opportunities and hopefully create more things like Crimson Friday concert series. So, and see here, we went through these numbers a bit, but this is just for this weekend. Hotel stay value was up 188%. Short-term rental, 97%. Length of stay for hotels was up 10%. Occupancy was up 70%. Average daily rate, ADR, was up 185%. All of that, great to see. So we talked about it, those key takeaways. Occupancy is up. Now that's not really, I would discount the hotel occupancy up compared to the prior year a bit because you're comparing the entire year. But the massive increase in average daily rate is what we were hoping to see, and that did happen. And then you can kind of see here on the graph with occupancy, for some reason the way they did it, Sunday, it's the first day of the week, so it pops up on the left, but it should be to the right. Everyone's checking out on Sunday, and if I could have gotten this sooner from them, I would have asked them to add Wednesday and Thursday on too. So, and then next time, if we can get this going, I'll just add the dynamic visualization, but I'll hold it up for all of you so you can kind of see here. That's the map of Norman, and so it gives me a time frame, and that becomes a moving. All those lights move around, and you can see it. So it really gives you a visual of what people are doing there. So yeah,
and I think by some, maybe many accounts, last season was maybe one of the worst home schedules OU's had in a very long time as far as quality of opponents and fans being excited to go see them. And then this year, it may not have turned out the way we may have wanted so far, but more quality opponents for sure coming to Norman and still to come with Alabama. So it'll be interested to see how the year end looks compared to that. So.
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions, Councilmember Nash?
Can we get that slide back up that we were just on with the lodging, the short-term rentals and
I think it was in my presentation.
Okay. This one. Oh, there's your presentation.
Ah,
Huh.
popped up. Okay.
Which one were you asking for?
um,
Let's see if
I
I can
think the
find
one,
the previous.
Was it from my other slide deck?
yeah, from January to September.
Yep, that was from the other slide deck.
That one? Or the next one?
Yeah, I think it's the last slide.
There we go.
So the STVR paid occupancy, that's supposed to be 35%. I was making sure I have what that percentage is. It's the number, basically the number of stays divided by the number of total available.
Which one are you looking at there?
Paid occupancy.
Okay, so from 30, oh, yeah, it's prior year should have been $34.
Okay.
That was a mistake. Yeah, it's not a percent, it's,
Okay.
and it may be some decimal points in there too that they're not showing, so the software pulled that off and I put the wrong formatting in the,
All right. Well, that just had me confused for a second.
yeah,
That
I'm
makes more
sorry.
sense.
That was a good catch, my fault.
Any other comments, questions before we move on? Okay, well, thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate the update on that. Look forward to hearing how the end of the season, end of the year numbers look compared to last year. What the SEC impact has had economically and visitors and all that stuff. So, yeah, I think that detailed data is really helpful for us all to understand what's going on.
Yes, anytime. My pleasure.
Okay. All right. Get this agenda back up. Our next item on the agenda is a continued discussion regarding creation of a tax increment finance master plan. An item we've been talking about for quite a long time, I would say, in Norman over the years, and then even more so recently, I think. And so we have Catherine Walker here to discuss this item with us.
Oh, thank you. So we talked about this last month, and you'll recall we brought out the GIS maps, and we were able to kind of circle up areas where council was interested in creating TIFs. And so I've gone through all of that and really dove deep into the data, and I'll talk a little bit about where that kind of ended up. But I just wanted to put a couple of slides up that were up last time. So these were sort of the goals we talked about last time. But, we looked at areas that were eligible, primarily enterprise zones. Those are easy, check the box, it's eligible kind of areas. And we have quite a few of those in Norman. And then identify areas where we may not have infrastructure or other things might be hindering development or redevelopment, and then go from there to identify these potential TIF project areas and increment districts that could address some of those needs. We also talked a little bit about the legislative guidelines, just to kind of keep in mind as we go through the process of what we want to look at and what we want to include in these areas. And you'll see that next to last bullet, this is one I struggled with. I tried to draw boundaries, and I probably need to continue to refine those, but I want to make sure that we're not dissecting areas in a way that would violate that. And I think there's some really easy ways to make it make sense when you draw out the boundaries. But I looked just in this initial look at it, you identified 3 areas sort of from downtown north. And I pulled every parcel. There's over 2,000 parcels in that area, and looked at land use designation, current zoning, how it's being used, whether it's vacant, whether it's something that I know, from working here previously is maybe a code violation or a building that needs to be redeveloped, a site that needs to be redeveloped, and tried to pull out information about all of those, because I know this area is really where you're probably going to trigger a TIF first. Because of Griffin and everything going on there. And then I've looked at the bottom half too, at the southern area that was outlined, and I'll have some slides on that here in a minute. So practical considerations for these, of course, creating the TIF is maybe the easy part. It doesn't feel easy, but it might be the easy part, because you have to figure out where the money is going to come from. And in this process, we don't have necessarily, in all of those areas, identified projects that will be revenue generators. So like I said, I was looking for undeveloped property, developed property that might be redeveloped in a significant way. And of course, the bigger the project, the bigger the revenue impact. And so if our project costs are high, we need a lot of development potential to generate the increment revenue.
Would one of the things like a proposed Griffin area TIF, could that boundary include the East Side Walmart in it, so that if residential development is happening on the Griffin site and those people are shopping at that Walmart and taxes or collections increase from that, could that be something that helps fund that TIF by including?
Yes,
that?
absolutely. The one thing though I tried to keep in mind is trying to limit the increment districts as much as possible so that we're not taking away from growth that the city would get to experience and enjoy for other purposes in the general fund. But that is challenging, and that's something, you know, you have to look at pretty closely, I think, to identify where drawing those lines makes the most sense for the city. So like I said, I inventoried the property, particularly focused on the northern 3 areas that you all identified. And then I was able to kind of draw out some increment district boundaries and a project area boundary based on this information. What I came up with and need feedback on is I drew, and I've got a bunch of maps I'll show you in a minute, but a large project area that would encompass Griffin Park, Griffin Memorial Hospital, Flood Avenue, hospital property, and East Downtown. So the project area is where the revenue can be spent. But the increment districts are where the revenue is generated. So I tried to draw those in more narrowly defined areas so that we're not shaving off property taxes from residential areas that are already developed. You know, we're focused on areas that we think are going to redevelop or develop for the first time. And so this is kind of what that looks like. It's a large area, and I'll tell you why I included Griffin Park here in a minute, because obviously that's not going to generate revenue if the city becomes the owner of it, which is what I think we all hope will happen. But it goes over, as I said, the project area is broader. It goes to Berry, and then down to sort of border the Center City TIF area, across the railroad tracks, and then down south to Acres and Alameda, and then over to 12th Avenue, and of course up to encompass Griffin Park and Sutton Wilderness. Within this, I think you could find 3 increment districts that make a lot of sense, of areas that need redevelopment, that would hopefully redevelop, and you'd see some benefit there. Obviously, this entire area is not going to redevelop, but this is one of the areas where we know there are some vacant spots. We know there is, for instance, a shopping center on Flood. That's one of those, code violation things I mentioned that needs to be redeveloped or improved.
Store?
Yes, improved in some way. There are also a lot of properties in this area, and this shows it better. You see a lot of areas identified in the Norman 2025 for industrial use, but the zoning and the current uses don't reflect that. So that might present an opportunity for redevelopment at some point. And so that's why I drew the boundaries there. And this is one of the areas where I would probably say I need to go back in and be careful of my line drawing and maybe get some of these residences in the southwest corner out of that, because I want to focus on the commercial industrial areas and draw those lines in a way where it makes sense and in accordance with the legislative guidelines. So need some refining, but that kind of gives you an idea of what that increment district could look like.
And it wouldn't have to be to necessarily encourage things to be torn down and redeveloped, but could pay for things like enhancing, redoing Flood Street, new sidewalks, Highland Parkway, University.
Yeah.
Fixing all the infrastructure in that area,
And
that
the
type of stuff.
beauty of having a broad project area with multiple increment districts is all of that money can fund projects within the project area. So where you might not see a ton of incremental revenue in this area, incremental revenue generated in the other increment districts could help fund improvements in this area. Increment district number 7 is sort of east downtown up to include Porter Avenue and the hospital campus. I know initially with the Inspire Health program, I don't think they envisioned just selling all of that off, but they may sell some parcels, and some of that might change with leadership changes. So wanted to make sure that got included. And then, areas along downtown where we might see some redevelopment, and we have seen some turning over in different parts of within this area. The lines are a little funky because I was trying to draw around residents as best I could. But that captures the commercial and office areas within that part of Norman. You can see here the 2025 plan and the current zoning, a lot of office and a lot more office than in the 2025 plan than in the zoning, which is interesting. But still, primarily commercial and office uses throughout. And all that blue you see on there are designated as institutional uses in the land use plan. That could include some nonprofits. It includes city property. It includes state property. And those are not contributors to the property tax.
I don't know if in 2003 and 4 that they were considering the idea that Griffin was going to move.
Right.
Or that the hospital would close completely.
Right,
and consolidate.
absolutely. You'll see some big updates with your new land use plan, I'm sure.
Councilmember Grant?
Exactly where my mind was at. And I think zoning updates come on the heels of the AIM update.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do a TIF district, let's say some changes happen and we want to include them. Can we do that later? Okay.
Yeah, under the Local Development Act, if it's a minor amendment, it's fairly easy. Adding substantial area especially would be probably a major amendment, and you go back through the review committee process and the planning commission and all of that, but it definitely can be done, and if it's fairly surgical, it's pretty quick typically. Here would be the final increment district within this Griffin TIF, and it is Griffin itself. This is where your big money generation is going to come from because it's going to be on the tax rolls for the first time. It's going to be heavily redeveloped. Not all of it, of course, will be, but a lot of it will be. And so try to draw those lines around all of that state property to anticipate that future development. The land use plan and the zoning is not very helpful here because it's all institutional and most of it hasn't been platted into even individual lots. So a nice close to blank slate there with that district. So thinking about possible project costs, I think, we have two categories. You guys are familiar with this: the assistance and development financing, and then public improvements or public facilities. I know Councilmember Peacock was asking about facade improvements and things for businesses. So I've included that here and called them small business enhancements. That's something that our firm has done in Owasso. I don't know that they've had many applications, but that process is there. There's an application, there's a policy guide on how those get granted. Development project assistance, so larger developments if they're requesting assistance. Employment generation assistance, so all of that office that was identified in the land use plan, if things start to turn over to office and you're bringing in employers, that's something that could be used for that or for the industrial pieces north of Acres. And then public improvements and public facilities. The reason I included Griffin Park and Sutton Wilderness, I know that you all have set aside money for the city's appraised value of Griffin Park and Sutton Wilderness. But if that was not sufficient, that appraisal is a couple of years old. If that was not sufficient, I wanted to make sure that we drew it in a way where you might have acquisition costs that TIF funds could help with. Street, water, sewer improvements, streetscaping, landscaping, things like that could definitely happen here. It's all going to come down to money, of course.
I was going to ask, and I actually talked to Councilmember Peacock a little earlier. He could not remember the name of the project in OKC where some affordable housing was in a TIF, and I definitely see an opportunity on that particular.
Yeah, and that would fall in with assistance and development financing. So what we have done in other projects where, it's not a singular project. You all did this with Center City TIF years ago. You adopt a policy guide that kind of outlines how you're going to look at projects. And so maybe it's a priority for affordable housing projects. And with Griffin, you're going to go through and do zoning, I would imagine, for that, hopefully in partnership with the state before it's ever put out to bid. And then you're kind of putting your stamp on what you want. And that's a way to kind of incentivize that affordable housing, but it definitely could be included as assistance and development financing. I think the biggest challenge with this, and the reason I included all three increment districts and all three areas that you all identified into one project, was I think Griffin's gonna generate obviously the bulk of the money because it's a blank slate, not on the property rolls or tax rolls yet. But I also think, depending on what happens at Griffin, most of that money might be needed for Griffin. So that's just something to consider. And the other thing is, of course, do you want to capture some percentage of sales tax and property tax, or just property tax? So that's something to think about. The South Norman TIF, and you know, these are just names that help me keep it straight. We'll come up with nicer names later, but this one would, I drew it the way you all had drawn it at the last meeting. It would be a large project area that would encompass Lindsay from Classen to 24th, down kind of to a point to Cedar Lane on the right side of, or east side of Classen. And then, you know, looking around there, there's other opportunities maybe to change those boundaries, and I'll talk to you about those in a minute, but it really depends on what your goals are. The increment district, I think we want to be targeted, and I haven't been able to dive as much into this one, but I do think this is one where you might want to wait until you have a big project coming. I mean, we all think, I think, of Perfect Swing in this area, it being like the biggest site that could be redeveloped. And that we would want to be redeveloped. So I think this one you might want to wait until you're a little closer to identifying a project. But that's what that area would look like. You could go further to the east. I can't recall if I included this map in there. I don't know if I did. And capture, for instance, Saxon Business Park. There's some vacancies. Lots over there that are owned by NEDC, and that might be an opportunity for some employment assistance if you want to help have some way to bring in and incentivize some new employer.
The on that map there, the to the south too, the Walmart, but also south of the Walmart we know has been platted. There's another
yes, the RV,
one coming forward with a new plat, I guess, for more intensive commercial than what we approved in the first one last year. So
is that the,
I don't know if we'll get
target, the rumored target?
Yeah. So I don't know if we'd be able to get that put together before that, but that whole area seems like it's going to be developing over the next 5 years. So.
Yeah, and when you look south of Highway 9, I was looking at all of this, you kind of got an S-shaped vacant land there in between the neighborhood.
I know we've approved plats for that, at least the St. James being
yeah, so that's all
all the
owned
way down
by
to Cedar Lane.
a residential developer. So at some point that will develop into residential uses, you would think. Again, with the emergency department with Norman Regional there at Highway 9 and 24th, I know in their plat, I recall they had some out parcels or other potential development there that we might be able to capture. So it's really just kind of keeping in mind when that's going to come online. And if you draw it down to capture that new retail development down south, then that might be cause to do it, you know, go ahead and move forward with it more quickly. Because that would be some good revenue for the project.
Yeah, being undeveloped land that's
Right.
going to develop and probably be intensive.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to bring up, and Anthony and I discussed this earlier today, is we both remember the Cedar Lane Bridge problem connecting 12th to Jenkins. And a development that had been proposed at one point for Highway 9 in Jenkins by the Farzanis. So that might be something you want to pull into because if that moves forward, that could generate some revenue, some significant revenue for this particular TIF and for the bridge, which Scott, I think was $17 million 3 years ago, something like that.
Requires improving Jenkins from Highway 9 all the way south.
Yeah, so that's
to-
heavy public infrastructure and you would need a lot of revenue to do
and a
that, but,
bridge and a big intersection. And
yeah. But it might give you some contributing source for a project like that.
well, I don't know what their current plans are lately, but last time I talked to them, they were not going to be requesting a TIF as part of their development, which originally they were. That was an
Yeah.
option. So.
Yeah, they talked about it at one point, but I think it was primarily to get the bridge built.
Yeah.
Is that right, Scott? That's what I remember. So, you know, public improvements heavy on that project if you bring that line further west to Jenkins. Assistance in development and financing, this would be great for the Perfect Swing side if you had a developer coming in wanting to do something that they could make application for that. And what I see that the firm I'm with has done a lot in Oklahoma City is they will calculate what your particular development will bring in increment, and that's the increment that gets pledged to your project. And so it's not taking from other areas, but you get the benefit of what you generate, basically. So that's something that might work with the Perfect Swing site particularly. And then employment generation assistance, as I said, you've got Hitachi with some vacant land there. You've got Saxon Business Park if you wanted to extend it further out to include that. This one has a lot of opportunity. It just looks a little different than the Griffin TIF. So right now, we don't know. I mean, if we want to draw it to include the Target and retail development down south, then that might be a reason to move forward more quickly. Otherwise, you might want to wait until you have a project on the horizon, just because these are larger projects that really need to be triggered to generate incremental revenue. Other things to consider, Anthony reminded me with the Campus Corner TIF, our very first TIF back in the early 2000s. All the improvements that were done in Campus Corner were not completely funded by TIF revenue. We had water and wastewater, I think, contribute wastewater to improvements to the system there, and so there you can combine other sources of revenue with the TIF revenue to make things happen. And so you always have other options, business improvement districts, which I know that's been somewhat controversial for downtown Norman. You could look at your upcoming CIP budget study session on November 19th and identify some needs there. If there are things that you really want to prioritize, you don't have to do it all at once, but just pieces could be done. You could identify a general obligation bond package to address some of those larger needs. For employer recruitment, of course, NEDC does this now, but just continue to connect employers with the state for their incentives and find some funding for maybe those kind of opportunities there. So there are other options, and you can definitely use a combination of funding sources to achieve the goals.
Even in Center City TIF, since its creation, the city replaced the sidewalks on Main Street from the tracks to Park Drive. And then now we're doing the same thing on Gray with the two-way project. And those are neither of those used any TIF funding for that, even though they're in the TIF area. So definitely some, opportunities outside of the TIF to kind of develop some options here. So the next steps, I think, do you want a formal adoption of a master plan? Or do you want to just start moving forward with these pieces we've identified? With Griffin, Daryl and I spoke last week, and I think there is some desire, at least, and I haven't heard what the conversations with the state have been more recently, but I think there's some hope that that's going to move pretty quickly when it finally does start moving, and so maybe that's something we want to have teed up. If that's where we want to go, I would start developing estimates with all my property inventory that I've done, to kind of get an idea of what that incremental revenue could look like. I'd probably just do it at 100%, and that way it's an easy math problem to take it back to 50% property tax or whatever percentage you all want to do.
And then start identifying specific project costs and improvement estimates. You don't have to know everything, and a lot of that's gonna be informed by how much revenue we reasonably think could be generated. And then I can come back, I think in December, and bring you those estimates and probably a draft of a project plan, if we wanna move that quickly. And if you would rather do a more formal adoption of a master plan, I can work on that and bring that back in December to, have you guys look at that.
Councilmember Grant?
I was gonna say, Assistant City Manager Stevenson has talked to State Department of Mental Health and OMES
Yes.
about Griffin's, like where, I asked earlier in the week and it sounded like we were having meetings regularly, but.
Yes. So, City Manager Pyle and I have been in regular conversations with the state, really over the last month. I mean, we were there was a long period of no communication for a while, then we finally, kind of got a hold of the right person, and we've been meeting weekly. They've also been in communication with Red Rock, that it looks like Red Rock is seeking maybe 10 acres of that property on Griffin. And so there's a lot of different conversations happening. There's, I think the state is now very motivated for the sale of some of those properties. It sounds like they are in the middle of having a survey done, at least for a legal description, so that they can maybe move forward with a portion of the sale of that property. There's a little bit of a question out there still as to who's gonna bring it through for zoning and plating. There has been conversations, I just don't have really good definitive, where do we stand? The conversations still are continuing. We have at least established a regular standing meeting with OMES, and so that's been helpful. So like every time we go into that meeting, we get just a little bit more out of them and a little bit more. They would love to be able to sell that by the end of the year, but I don't know if we're gonna be able to get all those pieces together in time.
I was gonna ask too, is the health services, social services part, is that moving all south of Maine, and the north of Maine part of Griffin would be its own?
That's my understanding.
So it's kind of where we're at, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Griffin Park and Sutton Wilderness would not need to be rezoned or platted though, correct?
That's correct.
So just everything south of Robinson.
Yeah, it's that we're talking, well, right now they're really focused, I'm sorry, let me correct myself. They're really focused on the property south of Maine and north of Alameda and west of 12th. So that little section right now, I was gonna say the stuff on the north side, I think they're not trying to move that as fast. But it's that tract right there that they're really trying to move out on.
That's what Red Rock is trying to purchase.
Yes. Well, not all of it, but 10 acres of that, yeah.
And there's other people trying to purchase stuff too.
Yes. Yeah.
So would an entity like Red Rock, would that hit the property rules? No.
I think so. I don't think they're, I'd have to look it up to be sure. I don't think they're a nonprofit.
They're not for profit, they said
Oh,
in a
okay.
recent meeting, yeah, so.
Yeah, so they probably wouldn't contribute to the ad valorem tax revenues. There are some provisions in the Local Development Act that say, if you're a public entity and you're leasing your space, you're operating it for a for-profit purpose, the arena, you're gonna have to pay ad valorem. And that's usually a pilot payment, because ad valorem's not typically figured on property owned by a public entity. But it also says that if you come into a district, you're a nonprofit, for instance, or a public entity, and you purchase property to develop it and further into the project plan, then you do have to pay ad valorem. So this probably would not fit with that, and my guess is they would not have to pay a pilot.
If you had some more tiny homes and things like that, would that, if it was run by a nonprofit, would that not be on the property?
If it was owned by a nonprofit, probably not.
Okay.
It depends on how you frame your project plan though, I think. I think if it's in furtherance of that type of development, there's an argument that it could be. But then that might disincentivize a development like that, you know? So just something to think about there.
So I wasn't here at the last meeting, and there was one other, you got all the other ones that I had in mind, but one other one that I've been thinking about was kind of the mall at Noah Parkway, West Lindsay to
We-
Berry Road.
We looked at that, and I can pull up the map.
And not as much as redevelopment happening, but infill development, mall parking lot, at Noah Parkway parking lot, and the large development that we just approved to the west of Noah Parkway. And then West Lindsay Street having a lot of opportunity for infill development, potential redevelopment, and then even though we already redid all the sidewalks and built the new street and lights and everything, what further enhancements infrastructure-wise could be added to West Lindsay that would help businesses and things like that in that area. So that's the only other one I've been thinking about.
Yeah, and I think, we looked at this last time, and that is not in an enterprise zone. I think that was the hiccup there. Does that sound right?
You'd have to go back to the state to ask them to look at it.
Yeah, you can request the Department of Commerce include it in an enterprise zone. I don't know if they would with some of that development that's on the horizon with the Bob Moore Farms, and that kind of thing.
So enterprise zone on the east side does go all the way down South Class into Post Oak Road.
Yes, yeah, let me pull that back up. That first map I showed, this is this part of Norman, this is all of the enterprise zones. Quite a bit. So we definitely work to stay within those.
Okay, so we might not be able to extend that to further south than Cedar
I'll
Lane.
have to pull up the map. I mean, it does go a little bit further shown on here, but it may go all the way to Post Oak. I'll pull that up and look.
And to clarify, the UNP, the most recent UNP TIF only qualifies because it was grandfathered in as an enterprise.
Yeah, it's part of a grandfathered enterprise zone, and the statute says when they changed how they figure enterprise zones, they grandfathered everything that had been designated up to that point in.
So TIF is not an option for mall at Noah Parkway.
I
West
don't
Lindsay
think
proper.
so. Unless you could argue it's a reinvestment area. It's definitely not a historic area.
I would probably argue a reinvestment area.
Yeah.
It's existing, it's not old as in historic, but it's not brand new, and it's got a lot of empty space that can be developed for the first time ever, and then some opportunities, I think, for redevelopment.
I
like the
hate
parking
this
lots and
laptop,
stuff, so.
nice.
I just thought too, with some of the creative things that you're seeing being done with old malls like that and the big parking lots, and then same thing with
Yeah.
older power strip malls like at Noah Parkway, building housing developments in the parking lots. And stuff like
Yeah,
Kinda like
yeah, and
Peter
I can look at that more.
What's that?
I can look at that more. It's really the Department of Commerce's map that'll show that. I don't think we have that layer, but on Norman GIS. But we can look at that.
Okay.
Sure. So do you want me to move forward with Griffin? And then also look at this other area and,
Should we call that the master plan, the south and the northeast,
yeah,
or southeast, northeast? Yeah, I think because that rumored retail that's coming, I don't know. Has there been any talk about Perfect Swing?
No,
Nobody's.
none that I know of, no. And I'm a little hesitant just because it is an area that seems to be developing on its own very well without any incentive.
Yeah.
But if there's infrastructure, there are infrastructure issues in that area that a TIF might be able to help address. I don't know, but
yeah.
I don't think we need a TIF in that area to incentivize anything unless there's some sort of special.
Actually, affordable housing.
Affordable housing, yes, I
Yeah.
agree. Or like Perfect Swing, if there's some sort of project that comes forward that we don't know about.
Yeah.
But
I would say too, maybe doing calling this the TIF District Master Plan with those two areas, could incentivize somebody, it's like, oh, they're looking at redeveloping, hearing you say that those funds generated by that area could go back into the project that's being built. I mean, might catch someone's attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to do a project like that, I think, is, you know, you kind of get what you invest, get a little bit of your investment back, without taking from broader goals or broader projects.
I would say too, if including the south area, that Walmart and then potential new Target or whatever it is that's down there, if including that in it allows increment from those developments to help reinvest into 12th and Lindsay, that area where it is struggling, has a new thing always going in, but
Yeah.
you know, and an area that's been impacted by, you know, before there were two new Walmarts, a neighborhood market and a super center, that grocery store had been
Right.
on that corner forever. And so now it's kind of a little desert of, so that's one aspect I would see where it'd be worth
Yeah,
including.
something I said last time, those legislative guidelines are important, but when a court's looking at them, they're relying heavily on what you all decide. So you'll see that in every TIF ordinance you've adopted where it sets out how those are met, and that's because the court is not making that decision for you guys, it's relying on you guys, so. And I think a lot of it really has to do with where you're spending that money. It's not necessarily where you're drawing the lines, it's what is the money going to? Is it something that would have developed that way already? Or is it something, you know, that like Perfect Swing that was struggling to redevelop for whatever reason?
Councilor Hinkle?
That was kind of my thought process behind adding that to that section, was just, you know, the potential for the development, the amount of housing that's already over there that would feed into it. And then my further concern on the Griffin thing would just be the conversations with OMES and how fast that they're willing to move. I mean, does it benefit us to go ahead and look at a Griffin plan and then maybe make that the bones for the master plan? That way because they're a lot further along than I think we realized. But when we were having the conversations about the shelter, you know, it seemed like we were in one place, and now it's very much with a real estate broker and all the things that they've gone into, it's a whole different negotiation now, so.
Yeah. I mean, we've been working on some of that since 2015.
Yeah.
So it has been a very long process, but it does seem to finally be moving, so that's exciting.
Part of the AIM process or plan is the consultants are supposed to be or will be drafting a master plan for Griffin, for the Griffin property. So, and I just got an update from Jane. It sounds like maybe the plan is to come to council in February with an update on that, or with sort of the initial thoughts on where they're at.
So the master plan for Griffin will be in front of us by February? Okay.
To take a look at.
And then to Councilmember Holman's point, I mean, I agree with you that that area is developing towards Noble about as fast as it can go. But it's more of the same type of development that we have, where it doesn't really have the walkability. And it's a lot of fast food and car washes and gas stations and things that generate revenue, but not necessarily the things that we want to see. And maybe it's what Noble wants to see, and then maybe it's what gets people from Noble into Norman. That's fine with me. I don't mind that at all. But with the potential for Target and, you know, that S-shaped kind of swath of land with the new hospital or affordable housing that's going in over there, and Saxon Park, I think there's just a weird mix that we could see. Plus our residents are calling for it. They want it bad, so.
Okay. Anything else? I think I'm good with, moving forward with that. I think in regard to that, having something on Griffin, having something in place beforehand, I think would be helpful instead of waiting until it's all done and then we're like, oh, we need to.
Yeah, even if we don't go through the process yet, if we have something teed up, when they're ready, we'll be ready. So that's good.
All right. Any final comment, question from anybody? Okay. All right. Maybe December, I guess you and Councilmember Peacock can discuss that agenda, but Okay, well, thank you very much, Catherine. Good to have you back at City Hall.
It's good to be back.
And if there's no final comment or discussion, then we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thanks, everyone.
I'm gonna quit buying raffles.